Hey everyone, I just got back from service management world, and as you can imagine, one of the big topics there was AI. So I wanted to take a minute to talk about how AI is being used in service management, how it's been used in service management in the past, and where I think the industry can go, where there's the opportunity to use AI more or more effectively, and some of the things that I learned from the conference about how you can effectively introduce AI to your organizations. Now, Doug Tedder did a great talk on building out your AI strategy. I'm not going to do everything that he did in his talk. You should go check out his talk. If you were at the conference and missed that talk, hopefully you have access to the recordings, or you can get his notes from the slides. But one way or another, definitely check out his talk. He did a great overview of the strategic view of adopting AI into your organization and making sure that you don't fall into we've all seen the statistics of 95% of AI efforts end up in failure. You don't want to fall into that 95%. You want to end up in the 5%. I think some of the statistics, that number is coming down. So that's a good thing. People are being a little more strategic about how they introduce AI to their organizations. But again, you want to set yourself up for success. So with that, let's take a step back to, I don't know, roughly 10 years ago. The big thing was automatic categorization. And not to get too deep into the weeds of how this actually works from the AI science perspective, but there's a type of AI, or type of machine learning, called a classifier. Basically, the idea is you have a bunch of examples and you want to assign them a label. In this case, this would be your category, right? This is desktop support, or this is a printer problem, or something like that. A similar problem is routing, right? I mentioned desktop support. Technically, that's probably more of a team than a category. But either way, we have a bunch of examples, and we have a relatively small set of labels. They can be hierarchical, they don't have to be, but we can use a traditional classifier to map these examples, these tickets, these incidents, to a particular category, team, what have you, anything like that. The problem with that approach was that it required a huge amount of training data. You had to have properly labeled data. You had to have a bunch of tickets that had previously been categorized properly, which meant that you either had to go back to your historical data if you were adopting a new platform that advertised, hey, you can take advantage of this automatic categorization feature. You had to use your historical data to train the classifier, or you had to use the new tool for several months, typically, before the classifier was good enough that it could kind of go do its own thing with an appropriate degree of certainty. Obviously, that's not how people want to work. They want to hit the ground running and get automatic categorization out of the box. So that wasn't really a reality, 8 or 10 years ago. Now, fast forward a little bit, and chatbots became popular. Unfortunately, those chatbots were very rules-based, and they're absolutely the chatbots that we love to complain about, right? So they had their demo day, and then they kind of fell flat. I remember working with ITSM systems at the time, and they made great demos if you could formulate the questions in the way that a chatbot could understand. But then when you actually tried to use them in practice, they didn't work very well. Nobody really wanted to use them. And like I said, they're the chatbots that we all love to complain about right now, because there are much better options, right? Over the course of the last several years, of course, we have ChatGPT, which was really a very compelling package around this new type of model, the large language model. And the advantage of the large language model is that it's trained on a large body of knowledge, and that is turned into this, for all intents and purposes, it's kind of this amorphous blob of knowledge, of training material, right? And the idea being that you enter a prompt that is natural language, and it does some magic and presents some feedback, right? The way it works kind of behind the scenes is that it does kind of predict the next token or word in a conversation, in a dialogue, monologue, in a some sort of textual form based on A, its training data, B, its system prompt, C, the prompt that you gave it. All of this kind of goes in and predicts, what would this model say would happen next in this kind of scenario, right? Which makes it very effective for things like, the things we've all used it for, right? Who hasn't used ChatGPT for one thing or another, right? We have seen this work, and it's extremely capable to the extent that it seems like it's an appropriate tool for just about anything you might want to use it for. And I'm not going to say that it's not, but that doesn't mean that there aren't, say, better tools, right, under the umbrella of AI, because LLMs are just one small part of everything that is AI. I mentioned classifiers, traditional classifiers, but there are many other types of AI. There's regression models, which are like scoring models and that sort of thing. There's things like, I'm losing the word, but how happy or upset someone is, right? There are models that are specifically built for that. And yes, we can use LLMs to do the same things, but they're slower, more expensive, and ultimately probably not the right tool for that. Initially, they might be an okay tool, right? To get over the training hurdle that you have with a traditional classifier, you could certainly use an LLM based on all of its training data, because basically with an LLM, you get the model and it is pre-trained. It's not pre-trained on your data, but it's pre-trained on enough data that it can kind of fake it, right? And over time, it can start to get better because it can start to include some of your data. There's this newer concept. It's not new in AI time, but it's within the last couple of years of retrieval augmented generation, a combination of your data using more kind of like a traditional search engine, plus an LLM, and combining the two together to take your data and generate it, synthesize it into something that looks like what an LLM would produce, or potentially what a human would produce, right? So you could potentially use something like your incidents, feed that into the LLM, and start to get some categorization, team routing, scoring of certain things, and then start to use that as training data for a more traditional classifier. And once you start doing that, then of course you can start to refine that with the true examples of, let's say an incident gets routed to the wrong place and then it has to get reassigned. Well, then you can use that, that reinforcement of this ticket got reassigned to this team. That becomes a higher confidence, a more truthful example that can be used to further train the classifier. And you kind of move that window, down the road. So the first 3 or 4 months you use LLM-based categorization, and then after that you start to build up that categorization based on a traditional classifier that is likely going to be more accurate because you continue to reinforce the training and continue to train up the model. It'll just get better and better and better because it isn't any longer training on, we've all seen, the AI slop comments, right? Where AIs are getting trained on AIs, and which were trained on AIs, and it's just getting worse and worse and worse. That's not what this is. You start out with the AI trained information, and then you start to reinforce that with human trained information, and it should get better and better and better instead of worse and worse and worse. So that's some of a combination of history of AI in ITSM and what I saw at the conference and my thoughts on how you can effectively use AI in your service management plan, process, and organization. If you have any questions on this, feel free to leave them down below in the comments. We are not doing a whole lot in the AI space yet. but we have done a couple things here and there. You can find some videos on the channel about that. And if you want to see what we have done, if you want to get a demo, there's some links down in the video description to schedule time with us or see the platform directly on the web. So, hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next one.